to model kit stuff, and our next video in Werk's U-9 First World War U-boat build. So in the last video I gave you a very brief update of what I've done, and in this video we're going to do a little bit more construction and show you some bits and pieces that we do. First thing we want to look at is this bit of wood deck. It gives you two options in the instructions: paint it grey or leave it a natural wood colour. I would have imagined a natural wood colour would have made more sense. Painted it, you know, with all the footwork on it, it would have worn off and look untidy. So I'm guessing it was a natural wood colour. I'm not sure whether this edge is correct. If you can see that it's really nicely moulded, and you can see the slats, and you can see in the moulding process they've tried to give you the impression of the beams that the slats are screwed into, but they have a slat right on the end, and I don't think that's probably right. I'm not sure, but anyway, I don't like the fact that you've got slat gaps, then you've got a solid bit, and then you've got slat gaps. So I want to put those gaps back in. So it's just a matter of doing that with a little razor saw. Now I'm not going to use a flexible saw because there's a danger we might not put a straight line in. So you're best with a rigid saw, something like this, I think, because it's quite solid. In fact, it's so solid that occasionally they can break. But yeah. Now, if you've not got one of these, they're definitely worth seeking out. I picked this up at one of the model shows once upon a time. Has a very fine side and a less fine side. They're both quite fine, actually. So we're going to use the wider cutting teeth just to cut those through. And I don't really need to go all the way through. I just want to give you that impression. These saws are actually really good if you want to put panel lines in. You know, when you put two fuselages together and you've sanded out your panel line, these are really quite good for putting them back in. There we go. So today is Tuesday the 16th of February, and I have just gone over 500 subscribers. So a very, 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 very big thank you to everybody who's taken an interest in what we're doing here. It's really nice, and I'm getting some very nice comments in the main. Some helpful subscribers who've made some really nice constructive comments. They're all welcome. What's not welcome is if you come along and say something that I think is offensive or that somebody else might find offensive. Don't be surprised if you find that if you post that your post disappears, because I will just remove it. So don't waste your time putting it on. Okay, so I've gone through the saw. The plastic it's a really nice plastic actually to work with, but what we might have to do is just go through that with a knife and clear that up a little bit just so it's visible. So I'll do one and show you, and then we'll move on. I don't want to bore you. Or as one viewer said, don't want nothing to be happening and just a lot of blah blah blah. Yeah, nice one, mate. If you look really hard, you'll find fast forward buttons. Right, okay, there we go. So you can see there we've cleaned that one out. Just running the knife through just gets all the bits of dust and bits out of the way, so we've got a nice opening, and it just looks a little bit more realistic on the side, I think. So that's that part done. Next thing is the cutting tower tops. So I'm going to use the one with a canvas on it, because it's going to give us some nice variation in colour. Now we've filled this with Mr. Surfacer, and I used Mr. Surfacer 1200. Now yesterday Nigel put up a lovely video of progression of his U-boat, and in there he commented on the fact that I shake mine up, and suggested that you didn't have a need to do that, and then went on to say you can take all that gungy dry stuff off the top and drop it back in, and it'll dissolve back into the liquid. So I didn't know that, so that was really handy, and you know, thank you Nigel for that. I do find that sometimes, especially if it's been sat there for a little while, that it can separate and you get like a clear liquid on the top, which is why I agitate it. But what I'm going to do now, following Nigel's video, is I will probably open the lid and have a look inside, and rather than shaking it up, because he quite rightly says it gets all in the top and then you can't get the top off, which is what does happen, what I will do is I'll perhaps give it a good stir up, maybe with my electric paint mixer or something, so if it's been sat around and separated. But yeah, I do find that. I don't know whether the temperature affects it, but it's all kept at room temperature. The pantry has been converted into a modelling storage facility. So all we're doing is gently sanding out. I don't want to take too much material away, I just want to blend it in. So we're just blending those in. What you find with Mr. Surfacer, if you've not used it, is you put it on and it shrinks back. It's actually why people use it as a primer. I think it's a bit expensive for using as a primer, so I don't tend to. But it shrinks back, so you'll need to put 2 or 3 layers on. And what I quite often do is I'll put 2 or 3 layers of the thicker stuff on, and then I'll go to the thinner stuff on the top surface. But yeah, so I'm just going to do one and show you, and then I'll do the rest off camera. There we go. So you can see we've got a perfectly shaped injection mark, which means I've taken that material back down at that everything's level. So we'll do with that with these. The process here is the same, but what we'll do is we'll cut off a little bit of sanding paper and do that locally, because we don't want to do any damage to the detail, you know, the little ties there. So we'll use some wet and dry on that probably, and then maybe we'll scrape it with a knife. In fact, I might come back and show you doing that just out of interest. So that's what we're doing with that part. With the bow planes, what we've done is we've taken the top nubs off and sanded them down. It's quite easy. There is another supporting bit of sprue there, so you can clean those up quite easily. What we need to do now is just remove the seams. So I want to keep these on the sprue because it'll make it easier for painting. So what we'll do is just go in with my little seam remover and just make sure we're all nice and clean. It's a very quick job. The thing with seams is if you're not careful, they can show chronic under paint, and it's the difference between looking like something realistic and looking like a toy in my mind. So it's worth that moment, and it is just a moment, to go around and just check you've removed your seams. If you've not got one of these, you can do it with a knife blade, but you might find your knife blade won't get into some of the finer detail. Okay, so that's all we're doing with that. They're nice and easy. It was the same with this part here. There's minimal cleanup on this kit as a whole. It's very nicely done, and they've thought about where to put the sprue connectors, so they're on surfaces that are easy to clean, and so on. If you're modelling the U9, then there's two options for the rudder, but if you're modelling the U9 you want to use the double one. I know in the instructions it says either can be used, but I haven't seen a photograph of U9 without the double rudder. I might be wrong, they might have interchanged them for different reasons, but I've not seen any evidence of that, so I'm going to stick with the double rudder. Next thing I guess is to fill this and get this up to speed. So what we're going to start with is just sanding this back, and I'm going to use a very gentle sanding stick just to take a little bit of material off. You can just feel there's a light seam there. Now the other thing that I need to say is that there was a little seam line here where the two parts have buttered up, and I have gone in with some Mr. Surfacer and filled the top, and the same here at the back, so I need to sand those down as well. And again, just using a very light grit sander. Just make sure we've not formed a lip. Sometimes when you're sanding you can form a little lip if you're not careful of material that's gone over, so it's worth just going around all sides of it just to be sure. Now I did carelessly, while putting this decking, get a little run of superfine glue which ate away a little bit, so I had to put a little bit of Mr. Surfacer in there. So I need to just sand that back as well. Something just a little bit more coarse. Right, that's nearly there. So what we'll do is we'll paint all of this in the light grey. Now just to comment on the light grey, I did say in another video, I can't remember if it was the first or the second, that I was going to use the Vallejo light grey for this. The paint it was calling out from Humbrol is the Ghost Grey, and I wanted to use something a bit different, but I've now found out that the Second World War German ship colours are the same as First World War and interwar, so you can get away with using the same colour. So I might have a light colour, so I'll have a look at that. I think again in one of Nigel's videos he compared the paints being shouted out and said, look, they're all slightly different. And my experience of military paints, which I have dealt with military paints in my professional career, is that they're never the same. They're never the same. No two batches are the same. Depends on the conditions when you put paint down and how thick you do it and so on. They always look a bit different. Okay, that's actually going to need more work than I thought. So I'm going to just go up a grit to take some material down a bit more quickly. So I'm going to use my emery board. Now this one's quite worn, so it's actually very fine, but it'll take more than these, which are very, very fine. And what I'm interested in ensuring is that we keep everything at the same level, we don't change the shape. So what I'm finding is, I don't know if we can see that on the camera, there's actually, this part here is actually curving in slightly, so it's not straight as it looks. It's got a slight bend at the end. So I'm actually going to put a little bit of filler in that side. Let's just have a look at this one. Now this is the side that I lined up, but then it left me with a gap. And actually, that one's okay. So I'm only going to need to fill one side. So I'm just going to drop that down at a grit and just work out any abrasive scratches we might have put in. Now these are sponges, but they're actually not very spongy, so they're sort of between a sponge and an emery board. I think these are the ultimate skinny sticks, which well, they tend to, as you use them, they tend to flex and you get these little lumps in. So I'm not sure I'll get these again. I might look at something else. I know Nigel recommends the Infini ones, so I like Infini products. I might well have a look at those next time. Right, what I'm going to do, because there is a gap there that we've filled with sanding dust, so I'm just going to run a little bit of liquid poly in, which will just melt that away a little bit. I'll let that dry a sec, and then I've got a very, very fine sanding stick, which will just polish out this surface. Now the surface on this isn't very textured, so you're not going to notice under paint that we've used a polishing abrasive in one patch. Yeah, that's going to need a little bit of filler as well, tiny amount. Got a tiny little hole there. So yeah, a little bit of filler in there. The other thing that we might do, if you see these holes, the lower ones are smaller than the upper ones, and some of them seem to be a little bit more closed up than others, so we're just going to run a fine drill bit through those and get them all a standard size. Right then, we need to deal with this hook on the bow. So as you can see, I've already cut mine off. I've used a razor saw to remove it, and I want to keep it as a reference for the scale of the hook that I'm going to form. So I have some 1/2 millimeter brass rod here, and all I'm going to do is just about 1 centimetre in, using the very end of the round nose pliers. I'm just going to form a bend of about 60 degrees roughly. I'll just check that on my protractor. Now 60 degrees is, yeah, actually bang on, would you believe it? 60 degrees is purely a guess, but it looks about right from the photos that I've looked at. Now if you Google Imperial German Navy U-boat SM U9, the Alame website will come up, which has some pictures, and there's a very nice picture with crew standing on the U9, and you can see right at the front very clearly this hook is triangular. So there we go, we've formed that. I'm just going to clip that off the wire, and then we're going to fasten it to some plastic card. So I'm going to cut a strip of plastic card, and then I'll come back. So I've got a little scrap piece of plastic card here, and what we're going to do is we're going to mount the wire edge onto this. Now this is 1 millimetre wide, this white card. The drill bit I'm using is 0.5 because I want a nice tight fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drill a hole and then the idea is we'll push the wire in at the bottom and trim the top until we get the right size. And then we can cut the white plastic card down to size, and cutting through the wire, which should be all in place by then. Perhaps a little bit difficult to explain, but you'll see. Okay, so we've drilled a hole. Don't know if we can see that. We've drilled a hole in the edge there, and we've got our little bit of wire. And all we're going to do is put the wire in like that. Now, if I put it in at the bottom edge, you can see the bottom's gone into the piece of plastic card, and we've got this much, which is extra length, which we need to trim off. Now, when I look at the picture, this straight edge shouldn't be straight. It actually leans forwards ever so slightly, so I need to take that into account. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fettle this till it's the right sort of shape, and then I'll come back to you and show you what that's like. Okay, so it's a little hard to see, but what we did, just to recap, we bent the piece of brass rod with some round nose pliers. We've then drilled a hole in a 1mm wide piece of plastic strip. You can just about see I've then made a pencil mark to mark the angle of the upper bit of wire, and we've drilled another hole. We've then trimmed the wire down, and this currently has then been put back into those two holes just to make sure that we've got the depth right, and we're happy with the shape and so on and so forth. So my next step will be to just super glue that in, I think. I'm struggling to get my camera to focus, but yeah, wonder if this will help. There we go. So then when we've glued it in and that's dried, we'll trim the plastic card back into shape, and we should have a hook that will work. What I've done is I have glued my bit of brass rod into the holes that we drilled in the white plastic card. I've now marked up the shape of the plastic card, how I want it to be, to turn it into the final shape for attaching onto the bow. So now we just need to saw those bits of excess card off. So I'm just going to use a micro saw to do that. You can just about, it's difficult, the light bounces off the white plastic card, but it's marked off in pencil, which is a little bit difficult to see, I'm afraid. But I've got this in my, I'm very lucky, this was my dad's actually, he was an engineer, and it's a toolmaker's vise that he used from being an apprentice, so this thing dates back to the 50s. And he unwittingly donated it to me as a modelling vise when I was a teenager, and I found it in the garage and decided I had a use for it. He's never seen it since, so don't tell him. Okay, so that's the first bit off. So I'm trimming the edges down first, and then we'll do the back bit, which involves cutting through the wire as well. Okay, so I've just cut off camera the second side. I'm just going to trim this down, and then we'll finally file it into shape. The one disadvantage of these saws, and I love these saws, they're really good, is these bolts do get in the way a little bit. There we go. And we won't chuck those away because they're always handy, so my scraps will go back in the scrap drawer. Okay, and we've got something that is getting there. Right, take that out of the vise. We're going to put it back in, and this is a totally flat edge, which is really handy. And we will get a file. Okay. And we can take that down, and this file will make short work of the plastic, but will also cut through the brass easy. And because I've put the line I want to file down to flat against this, I can basically file right down to the vise. There we go, bit of the brass wires coming through now. There we go, so we've basically filed that flush with the vise. And we have a new hook. So we'll just put that next to the original. Get a little bit of tape. So what we've done is we've fabricated a new eye. At the same time of correcting the shape, we've also corrected the thickness. So there's a big difference there in the thickness. And you can see we've changed the shape and the size. And that should look a bit more authentic. All we've got to do now is thin the bow out. Now, back to Nigel's modelling bench. So Nigel has looked at the bow in the same way that I'd said that I was agonising over it. And just like me, he initially wanted to see what he could do with preserving the rivets. And then established that he couldn't. So I've had a look, and when you look down on it, actually the line of the hull here means that really you need to be sanding back almost to the point where this eye here starts. Well, I've got away with not going quite as far back of that. I've scraped the top one, and I'm just doing the second one down now. But you are having to lose those rivets. Now Nigel's using some Archer rivets, which are like raised decals that you put on, and he's talked about those, and I've looked at those in the past for funnel rivets, and I think they're a good solution, but I also think they're very expensive. Whenever I've looked, they've not been in stock. So I won't be using that solution. I'll be using this riveting tool. So this is an RP Tools rivet maker. In fact, if I take my little thin bit of plastic card out, you can see that better. Comes in all sorts of sizes. I have one for hexagonal bolts as well, which I use. I use that one quite a bit, but I use the rivet maker much more. The hexagonal head one is great for 1350 tanks. And if we take it right down to the smallest, the 0.6, you're just about ever so slightly larger than the rivets that you're losing. So how these basically work is you put the plastic card in, you put the punch in the hole, like so, and then give it a tap with a hammer, and you've made yourself a little domed head rivet. So that means I'm going to have to make quite a few of those. So my process, first thing I've done, because I've already put my primer down, is I've wrapped it in cling film. Now I use cling film quite a lot for masking big surfaces and covering things up so they don't get damaged. It's ideal for, you know, minor blemishes and keeping paint off and stuff. So while we're working on this, it's going to keep all the dust and swarf out. It means that anything on my fingers, I can handle this without worrying that I'm going to damage anything. So that's my first thing. Then the second thing we've done is we've taken a really good close-up photograph of the front here, so I can recreate the rivet pattern. And then we're following the same process that Nigel has described, and we're just scraping this back, and I'm using same saw that he used, just to mark out the start and ends, because we need to create, if we look here, these, I'm not quite sure what they are, we'll call them rubbing strips, but basically they go over the edges of the panels, but they disappear into the bow here, into the stem, and as we're thinning those out, we want those to be more pronounced. So we're just running the knife, the saw at the top and the bottom of those, so that you've got a line that you don't go over. It's a similar process that I've shown on the Warspite with the chisels. Then we're initially scraping back with a number 11 blade, and then I'm doing any fine work with my seam scraper, and then I'm going in with a very, very worn out emery board. Now it's important that you don't use a sponge on that, because you want to keep everything nice and straight. So emery board will do just fine. And what I tend to do with my emery boards is cut a section out, and actually cut that section into two thin strips. Then gives me a couple of thin sanding strips, but it also means that I can get in better in some areas, and this just happens to be okay for there. We'll have to adjust it for that one, and for that one, but should be fine. I'm most worried about the rivets here around the torpedo tube. Nigel seemed to preserve his, so we perhaps won't need to go quite so back. I've also looked at this bit here. There's a lot of rivet detail on there, and my initial thought was actually see if I could replace it with some lead foil, and I tried to emboss it with the rivet pattern. I don't know if you can see that in the light there, but wasn't 100%. So I'm now thinking that I might cast that as a part and make replacements with green stuff. So before I do anything with that, I'll make a cast and see how well that comes out before I decide to remove it. The other thing we could do is saw that off and remove it as a lump, then saw it in half, thin it down, and then put it at this end at the front, and then put it back on, making the front, the apex thinner, but don't know. Nigel also pointed out, and I hadn't noticed it, that the flat here ran into there a bit and needs a bit of reshaping, and there's some rivets that need to go back on or weren't on. Now I agree with him that probably should be more rounded. This maybe not so. It's almost like it's almost like a bumper, if you like, so it's there for a bit of extra protection. So yeah, that's my thinking at the moment. Right, so I want to mould, or attempt to mould, these plates at the bottom, these surfaces, so that I don't have to recreate them if I sand them off and do all the rivet work, which would be a bit of a nightmare. So I have used this stuff before in one of my Arizona videos, so if you and I went through the process in detail, so if you go and have a look back at my Arizona videos, you will find this. So I'm not going to labour it here, but this stuff is basically called, I think it's called green stuff moulding sticks, and they're sort of a plasticky, rubbery sort of stick. I think they come in different colours. I think there's like translucent blue and stuff like that. I wanted the clear ones because I think you can see your part better, and you can see on this one, if I get my hand behind it maybe, you can just see the witness of the item that was moulded for the Arizona. I've used it a couple of times in Arizona. These are great for replacing, making replacements of small parts that you might have lost. Now I say small parts that you've lost, that's where you've got more than one and you can cast another. Obviously. Right, so all we're doing is, this is some water that was boiled a minute or so ago, so it's hot but it's not boiling, and we're just going to pop those in so that they soften up. And then if this goes to plan, what we will do is we'll mix up some green stuff. Mine's getting mine's a little bit old, so it's starting to take its time to harden, but if you get some new stuff, it hardens relatively quickly, and it's much harder than the plastic, so it's sandable, and you can do all sorts with it. And what we'll do is we'll let that warm up, and then we'll make an impression, mix up the green stuff, push it in, and hopefully make 2 replacement parts. And if that goes well, then I can crack on with doing that. If it doesn't go well, I'm going to come up with something else, because I really don't want to lose the rivets on there. Although I can make new rivets, the rivet detail, there's a lot of rivets on there. It'd take me a couple of days just to replace the rivets. Okay, so that should be getting soft enough now, so I'm just going to turn it over. You know when it's starting to get soft enough because it sort of gets a bit sticky, which is if you're casting a part and you want to cast both sides, you stick the two together, and that stickiness holds it together. So it's quite a clever product, really. But just going to try and stop this wobbling about. Okay, a bit unsuccessfully, but anyway. There we go, that's soft enough now. So you can see it doesn't take very long. I'm just trying not to handle it for no other reason than it's been in quite hot water. and we're just going to push that onto the part. Like so. Now then, let me just get something to help you see. Work. See if I can get in the light there. No. Well, anyway, it has worked. I've got a nice impression. Can't get that angle, sorry, I can't get that to show up very well. But it has definitely worked. I wonder if that would work better. No, you can just about see it there, I think. Just about see it there. So that has worked. So we're going to let that cool, and then we'll put some green stuff in and see if we can make some replacement parts. Oh, it's cooled down a bit now. We'll just make sure there's no dust and debris on it. We don't want to cast a hair. And I want to just press that in. Now I did think about whether I could use this to recreate these as well, and the answer is probably not, because we're changing the shape, whereas with this I don't want to change the shape. There we go, that's worked as well. So that's those two parts cast. We'll make some green stuff up in a minute and see how that goes. Okay, this is starting to get sticky, so I know it's ready. So I'm just going to roughly flatten it out so that we've got, we know it's going to cover the space. And then we're going to push it in, and what I find is if you just dampen your finger, it stops it sticking while you're pushing in. Otherwise, especially with something as thin as this, it'll stick to your finger and you'll be constantly peeling it back out. So we're just going to push that in place, and because it's clear I can see that I've got it pushed in. What I don't know at this stage is how well it's going to pick up all those tiny rivets. It's usually pretty good, and I'm quite confident this should work. So I will leave these to dry a little bit, and then we'll have a quick look at what they look like when we remove them. So I think we're going to call that the end for this video. I'm going to carry on scraping the shape into this bow. I'm doing it exactly as Nigel's done it, so if you want a much more detailed explanation than I'm giving you, go and have a look at Nigel's modelling bench and see what he's doing, because I'm basing my alteration on what he's found. And then in the next video we will put the that sort of towing guy or whatever it is back in place. We'll have finished shaping this. We'll have a look at the process of putting the rivets back on, and we'll have a look at what we're going to do with this bow plate at the bottom. So yeah, I'm happy with the progress of that, to be honest. So okay, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching. Please stay safe, everybody, and catch up with you again soon.